family, friends, and our guests who are here. You are all welcome. Just want to indicate that we're just waiting for two members of the family, so we'll have 5 minutes, let me say so, while they are coming in, so you can chit-chat, know one another a bit, catch up, last-minute news. My name is THOKO DIDIZA, Member of Parliament, and I'm the House Chairperson for Internal Arrangements. So we're here. Mary, welcome. We haven't started. I've got your seat on my left. Once again, good morning. My name is THOKO DIDIZA, Member of Parliament, and I'm the House Chairperson for Internal Arrangements here in the National Assembly of Parliament. I'm here today on behalf of our Speaker, Honorable Baleka Mbete, who actually last year, 2015, thought it was important that as Parliament, as this people's representative, we honor the women of our country who have played an important role in various capacities, but more importantly, in ensuring that we attain our democracy. We all know that the journey has been arduous, but at the same time, while we appreciate political power that we attained, we're mindful that there are still many challenges that lie ahead. And that through the work that those many women have done, that will act as an inspiration for us who have to carry on their baton. But we also know that we meet here today, 60 years later, where a majority of women of South Africa marched to the Union building to express themselves, representing their communities, about the state of our country at the time and what they thought needed to change. Interestingly, as we celebrate those women, the question probably that all of us ask ourselves is how much have we moved as a country, as Parliament, as government, towards the realization of those issues that there were concerns about. Last year, as part of this memory project by the Speaker, we honored Mayor Charlotte Maxeke. 2016, Honorable Speaker thought it was important to honor MaRay Alexander because of the role that she played. And in doing so, and in consultation with the family, we actually thought, as opposed to having a memorial lecture as a speaker, would have wanted initially, in our engagement, we thought it was important to do it a bit different this time. Even if the lecture might still be there, but given who Ray was and the role that she played, it was important to honor her by having an engagement among ourselves as the legislature, together with the women constituency, particularly those who work in farms, the constituency in which she worked, also with the labor movement and the Communist Party and the African National Congress, the parties which she was belonging to and associated with. We thought it would be good that in her memory, we also have a conversation to say where we are, where to from here. So this is a symposium, really. There will be lead speakers who will tease few issues for us, and then collectively, all of us, we will have some discussion. And I'm sure all of us will appreciate that we are going through a difficult time as a country, in which I think once again we're looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying, what is it that we need to do to ensure that the ideals of those who went before us are not lost, are retained? Without looking at other people, it's also about maybe asking each one of us and as constituent organizations to say, what do we need to do in terms of what Mayor Alexander stood for and did among ourselves? And as parliamentarians, looking at the legislative arrangement, how far have we gone? And I must say that I'm happy that joined with me here is the chairperson of the Labour Portfolio Committee, Honorable Lumka Yengeni, who's here, Methandi Memela, who's the chairperson for the Women's Committee, and also Mepetswewu, who represent the Women's Multi-Party Caucus Steering Committee. So you do have people with whom you can ask, why such a law? We can indicate why such a law, and you can tell us whether you think this law is relevant. But I must say that I'm also happy that not only us as activists alone, but also academic activists such as Ruth Hall are also here. Yeah, I've seen. Will share with us briefly. She's not on in your agenda, but in my agenda, she's there. I'll ask her to say a few words after Leon. But more importantly, I must thank the family of MaRay Alexander who are here, who have been gracious enough to allow us, with all the little hiccups that we might have had, to ensure that this day finally comes. One of them, Sis Tanya, will speak at the end, but Umafungwashe in English is the elder one in the family. Sis Mary is also here. I've seen the cousins and the nephews and nieces and everybody of the family in their wholeness are also here among us to share this day. You are all welcome. But also the friends of the family are also here who felt they would like to be part of this engagement with us. All of you are welcome because all of you are important in your various capacity. Tony, Andre, Leon next to me said, I'm happy I haven't seen Tony for long. I've seen him here. So during the engagements and also during lunch, I'm sure we'll have more time to network and pick up from where we might have left off in the past. And I trust that as Parliament, through this symposium, we will be enriched by your ideas. The program has been circulated to all of you. And I will actually start so that we don't waste a lot of time. Our keynote address will be given by Leon Levy, who is a friend and comrade of MaRay Alexander-Simons, who's also a trade unionist and a former SACTU leader. Leon is a board member of the Center for Conflict Resolution and a member of the Commission of Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. Over to you, Leon.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me, and a warm welcome to all of you here today. It's a great pleasure for me to talk about Ray Alexander-Simons. Thank you again for asking me to give the keynote address on the theme of what would Ray Alexander do if she landed in South Africa in 2016. This is just the right title for a talk on her life and work, on her passionate interest in the liberation of women and the labor movement. She would have loved the title. It suggests what she was, a practical and go-getting revolutionary. I was 25 years old and the secretary of the Food and Canning and Allied Workers Union, which had been established by Betty du Toit in Johannesburg. She was a pioneer trade unionist who fell victim to a banning order at the same time as Ray. Luckily for me, Ray was actively working underground in the Cape after she received her banning order and invited me to assist her in some of the problems in wage negotiations here in Paarl. That was the start of many visits to Cape Town and a lifelong working relationship with her. She was a practical and very patient mentor. If Ray Alexander-Simons landed in Cape Town today, the 7th November 2016, and started organizing workers 5 days later, which indeed she did when she landed in Cape Town in 1929, she would find a vastly different scenario. Her work will be cut out for her, but first we must put it in context. She will find 3.11 million workers representing 25.3% organized in trade unions. A shop stewards movement comprising what I believe to be 300,000 men and women in almost every industry and sector in the country, who will have become an essential component of our civil society. According to the Department of Labour, the 1st of October 2016, these workers will be organized in over 193 registered unions, with branches in almost every major city and town in South Africa, and affiliated to one of any three federations. She will have in her toolbox the most avant-garde industrial relations legislation, labor relations processes and procedures, rights and obligations in the Labor Relations Act. She will have legislation on employment equity, a Basic Conditions of Employment Act, which incidentally updates the one Ray and her fellow trade union leaders fought for in the late 20s and 30s of the last century, and a Skills Development Act, which provides an institutional framework to develop workplace educational training. All this is reinforced with jurisprudence and laced with 87 years of custom and practice. She will find it protected by a much envied constitution, a Bill of Rights, a Labour Court, a Labour Appeal Court, Supreme Court, and a Constitutional Court. Most importantly, she would welcome the growth and success of the Commission for Conciliation and Arbitration, which now exists in every region of the country and handles 250,000 cases a year. Her arrival in South Africa will coincide with 22 heady years of working class achievement in South Africa, much in industry where unions have negotiated hugely important collective agreements on terms and conditions of employment, as well as agreements on national and workplace relationships. These embrace organizational rights and substantive terms and conditions of employment, including new generations of rights which cater for the rehabilitation of workers who have problems with drugs and alcoholism, and also trauma counseling in the event of abuse or violent injury. Most importantly, she will find an accumulation of high expectation, an ever-increasing gap created by exploitation of the past, and a present of unfilled opportunities to enjoy a lifestyle comprising decent jobs, adequate wages, and benefits to sustain it. Save for a modest breakthrough of a minority, this has not happened. The workers' dream has been deferred, and they no longer can afford to wait for it. They are seeking to grasp the legacy of a greater future which Ray taught was capable of achievement. Consequently, Ray will find that officially 25.3% and unofficially 39.4% of the workforce is unemployed. This figure includes those who have given up and withdrawn from the hope of finding a job and a better life. In 1994, there were 4 million of the very poorest, and now there are 16.4 million who depend on a social grant to feed their dependents and are not yet fully enjoying the benefits which their struggle for freedom promised. Ray would take a fresh look at the structure and role of the trade unions in South Africa, especially methods of organization and struggle. She would want fail-safe accounting systems and education on the scourge of corruption, which I will address in this paper. She will find a duplication of trade union organization, with unions competing against each other for members and revenue. For example, there are 5 unions servicing the transport industry and a large number of unions who service workers in the security industry. This is the largest security service sector in the world, which employs 450,000 people. She will find a proliferation of small unions, servicing farm workers and organizers who lack the training and expertise of some of the more established unions. She will find an erosion of industrial unions organized on the principle of one industry, one union, now recruiting members indiscriminately from a myriad of different workplaces, from an assortment of industries and organizations. While Ray would be greatly pleased with a high level of democratic accountability and transparency concerning the negotiation of agreements and seeking of mandates from members to ratify proposals for settlements, she would not approve the strike-related violence involving the torching of houses of fellow workers who do not join in the strikes. She would want to address this problem urgently and seek to strengthen the practice of balloting and explore possibilities of new kinds of intervention. Inevitably, she'd turn attention to the current turmoil in the labor movement, including the current circumstances in the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, and its role in the Congress Alliance. I think she would think deeply about the role and place of trade union federations in South Africa, past and present. She would look for progressive and practical solutions. There would be merit in analyzing shifting and political and economic trends in our global and local environment, and whether the changing circumstances and compositions of the South African workforce is driving the labor movement in different directions. There were many sides to Ray. She was a political leader in her own right, and an outspoken socialist, a determined and charismatic leader of women who would bravely follow her in the face of often violent aggression, an activist who had unique and natural organizing skills. Her house-to-house visits, where she recruited union members and potential leaders of the liberation movement, are legion. She had a style and technique which is not easy to emulate. Landing in South Africa in 2016, she would not find an equal society and would actively seek changes. In her role as a champion of women's rights, she would certainly acknowledge progressive changes in the treatment of women, but she would soon identify much discrimination and actively challenge any apparent superficial change. She would actively support the struggle against the scourge of rape and abuse. Ray had the capacity to be a leader among leaders, and at the same time encouraged development of shop stewards and workers on the shop floor. I remember well when she was banned from participating in the then Food and Canning Workers Union, and how the officers, members, and shop stewards, who she taught by example, and especially in her study classes, rose to the occasion and took over the running of the union. Her faith in the ability of dedicated members was boundless. She sought out Liz Abrams, a devoted union member who I remember well, and she was a good shop steward, and Ray encouraged her to accept the position of General Secretary of the Union. Liz rose to great heights in the trade union and liberation movement, and when she retired from Parliament, spent the last days of her life organizing unorganized farm workers. Integrity had a high place in Ray's scheme of things. Competent and honest administration was important to her. It was a concern throughout her active working life. She feared corruption and warned that its effect was corrosive, destabilizing, and financially debilitating. She talked a lot about this to the leadership of the trade union and liberation movement, and warned that if it was not addressed wherever and whenever it occurred, its destructive effect would devastate our new democracy. Landing in South Africa at this particular time, when we are experiencing a crisis of corruption and state capture, Ray would almost certainly take the lead in exorcising it wherever it existed. She would seek secure methods of control, measures to prevent it, and a strengthened ethical code to stop corruption in its tracks. She would soon realize that there is still much work to be done to recruit and instill important values, such as respect for different points of view, excellence in one's approach to work, accountability in every area of responsibility, awareness and tolerance of diversity. She would lead the fight against any indication of racism and fight it tooth and nail. She would abhor intolerance towards immigrant workers and expose xenophobia. She would insist on intensive education and practical steps to combat xenophobia. While she would acknowledge some progress in organizing farm workers and the development of shop stewards who are changing relationships between workers and farm management, she regarded it as too slow, spasmodic, and lacking in planning, organization, and purpose. She would embark on a wide-scale plan for the trade union movement to allocate time and resources to visit farms throughout the country and systematically organize on a farm-to-farm basis. She would expect officials, organizers, and shop stewards from every trade union in the country to participate in a plan. She would expect to organize mass meetings of farm workers and use the opportunity, as she did with the canning workers from 1941 to the time she was banned in 1952, to establish what farmers wanted most. what farmers wanted most, to improve their terms and conditions and build on what they have achieved since 1994. She would want farm workers to militantly demand their organization rights and express their demands in order to play a fulsome part as stakeholders in each farming enterprise. She would campaign for the establishment in every farm, a nursery and preschool facilitation, medical aid and pension funds. Ray, who read and studied the workings of our economic system and shared her knowledge and ideas on the meaning of a better life, would look at the bigger picture on the social and economic direction of the country. She would do as she always did, talk about solutions to problems, and more specifically, solutions to erase poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So without doubt, it would not be too long before Ray mobilized all available resources to research and develop a well-thought-through plan for militant campaigning to invigorate enthusiasm and practical improvements in our national economic plan. She would empower the national workforce, organized and unorganized, with an understanding of what equitable redistribution of wealth and resources actually mean. Ray, who pioneered the creation of wage legislation and the creation of sectoral determinations, which established minimum wages and equal pay for equal work, basic working conditions such as restrictions on excessive hours of work, overtime working, and acceptable rest breaks for tea and lunch, will find that the time has moved on, and the system of sectoral determinations which establish minimum wages has been overtaken by globalization and different operational requirements, different circumstances. Ray would remember the trade union movement's struggle to establish early legislation on wages and working conditions. She would use her massive experience to find a solution for the creation of a national living wage, a national health and housing scheme to lift the horizons of the poor as well as the better off. In effect, she would support the establishment of what modern and developed countries call a social wage. She would demand more progress in that direction from NEDLAC, which has spent, with respect, too long in discussing ideas with business, labor, and government. She would be mindful that nearly 40% of the working population is unemployed, and her vision, therefore, would include them in a plan which modern economies have come to accept as essential and the responsibility of the state, and not only or necessarily the employers on farms and in industry. I'm looking forward to the contribution of our speakers this morning on the problems which women still face and what action is being taken from where Ray left off. I'm sure Ray would applaud it and lend her support. In conclusion, I'm proud to say that the life and times of Ray Alexander is still an inspiration to us all. Her cause was invincible and her values indestructible. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Leon. I think what Leon has done was to bring MaRay alive. To those who know her, I'm sure they could relate to some of the things he said, to those who didn't know her, I'm sure they marvel how wonderful MaRay was. But one of the interesting things that you said, Leon, in your reflection, was take us through the journey of who Ray was in terms of what she did as an organizer, as an activist, the values she shared and she held, and how she would bring those to life today if she were to land in South Africa, 7 November 2016. But in the same journey, you shared with us some of the things that we have attempted to do. I looked on the side and looked at LUMCA, the Labor Relations Act, and some of the things that should have wanted us to do, but also some of the shortcomings on the things that we have not done that we need to continue to do. Thank you very much, Leon, for that exposition.
My pleasure.
I will now ask our presenters, and Ruth, I want to warn you to prepare your reflections. You'll be the first one after the presenters, so I'm giving you some time. And Lumka and Tandi on my left, I'm also giving you some time for your reflections after Ruth, so you've got enough time as you're thinking. And Me, Twewu, and Machese, I want to also recognize our Member of Parliament, Machese, who's also part of the Women's Committee. Welcome again, Me. I know that one of the honorable members had to leave, but she's coming back again because of another commitment. We'll have a very lively discussion because this is a symposium, so we listen, but we also have got our minds to reflect on what has been said, but also some that might not have been said, which we think would be important. I'll now ask Wendy, Wendy Pekeur from Ubuntu Rural Women's Movement, who will share with us some views on protest action to promote and defend socio-economic interests of working women. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Good morning, everybody. It's quite an honor to be here. I want to thank you for the opportunity. Celebrating the life and legacy of Comrade MaRay Alexander comes at a very important time. This is so relevant in the light of the recent strikes, or the current strikes happening in Robertson with Robertson Winery, and also the recent student uprising and call for free tertiary education. Ray's belief in the equality of all people meant involvement in the movement for women's rights in a successful liberation struggle in South Africa had to include the liberation of women. However, there is much to be done to ensure women workers are emancipated. The South African Constitution gives us the right to assemble peacefully and unarmed to demonstrate and to picket. South Africans have a history of militancy, but we also still witness the effects of a very violent past. Our people knows how to take to the streets. In the light that Ray was a very militant trade union activist, I would like to pay tribute to women in trade unions organizing and mobilizing women workers. I would like to pay tribute to Sikula Sonke, women-led trade union for farm workers, to SATSAU, I see Comrade Myrtle in the house, Domestic Workers Union, other unions and organizations working selflessly to improve the lives of women workers. Trade unions have to move away. In the light that my topic is socio-economic rights, they have to move away from the traditional model of male leadership, especially the COSATU trade unions, since Ray come from the ranks of unions within the movement. What greater honor will be given to her? She who had to go underground to continue the good fight. If women are taking leadership positions within COSATU, the general secretaries, the presidents, with all due respect to the men in the movement, because I know a lot of great work has been done, especially to my comrade Tony, who's also in the house. He has done a lot of great work within the movement, but I really do think in honoring Ray's legacy, we need to look at women's leadership, because women make up the majority of numbers within the trade union. And also women are more in this country when you look at the numbers. And it's something that must really, that must be looked at. Today we have the right to organize, the right to bargain collectively. We've got the right to strike, the right to form and belong to trade unions. Let us use our rights in the Constitution to ensure women enjoy all rights. On farms, women are still dependent on a man for a house. Between 1994 and 2004, a study was done that 1 million farm workers were evicted from farms. It happened in the first 10 years of our democracy. 77% of those evicted were women and children. And it happened because the male counterpart, he loses his job, or he deceased, or he was no longer fit to work, and then the entire family was out on the street, which means there's a big problem there. We need new forms of organization. Personal is political. We cannot look at the labor rights of women workers only. We must look at women's housing rights, socio-economic rights, health rights, and really all rights affecting women if we want women to be liberated and free. I am a former seasonal worker on a fruit farm in Stellenbosch. In fact, that was my first job after I've completed school. And early morning, I've been reading up on Comrade Ray Alexander, and I must say, for me, she really laid a foundation. I mean, she is a hero in the labor movement. She is a hero in the field of women organizing, because she's been the general secretary, and I've read how young she was when she started her activism, and I mean, wow. I mean, what better foundation to be laid for us young trade unionists and women in the field, and for our daughters and other young women to come. When I was a farm worker, I couldn't join the union because at the time the union only organized male permanent workers which were mostly male. And even today we see that in agriculture, 2/3 of the numbers of women are still seasonal and temporary, which leave them outside of bargaining processes. But we as women came together, and I think if Comrade Ray looked down on us today, she will be very proud, because just listening to you and what she would have loved to see in the future. I mean, we used our rights enshrined in our Constitution to form and join trade unions. And in 2004, we seasonal farm women from Stellenbosch, Grabouw, Citrusdal, and many other places, Ceres, Franschhoek, Wellington, we formed our own trade union. The very first of its kind, led by women farm workers. Sikula Sonke, meaning we grow together. We knew women had to lead. We knew we had to lead efforts for change in our own lives. We knew if we want to change the lives of the women we work with, we have to look at all challenges affecting farm women. So when we started our negotiations on farms, the first thing we looked at was paid maternity leave, because there was no way a woman can go on maternity leave without having an income. So that was the first thing that we've put on our negotiating table. Why? Because the agriculture sector, retail and many other sectors are still very vulnerable in this country. We don't have centralized bargaining, which means we still do shop floor, on the ground level negotiations. So you must go to each and every workplace to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement. So when we achieved paid maternity leave on some of the progressive farms, I mean, for us that was a very important thing. And I mean, we can still build on that. Other benefits we negotiated included provident funds, medical benefits, creches on farms. Auntie Martina, she used to be the vice president of Sikula Sonke, living in Stellenbosch on a farm called Bolton Wines. And she lost a baby due to pesticides being sprayed. Because way back she had to go to the vineyards carrying her children on her back. And then that very day a child got sick. and not realizing it could have been the pesticides that were sprayed, because while she was working, the baby was laying there, and the pesticides were just sprayed. Today, we've got legislation. We've got Occupational Health and Safety Acts. We've got the Labour Relations Act. I'm so very happy for the laws that we have, because before 94, there was very, very little protection for farm workers. Today, we've got laws, and we can utilize those laws. We can exercise our rights in the Constitution and also the laws. Not saying it's perfect, because sometimes there's a lot of problems when it comes to enforcement and monitoring, but we've got the laws, and we can use it to our benefit. We had so many things we did as an organization. We came to Parliament, we slept at the gates of Parliament to highlight the plight of farm workers being evicted, because when you lose your job on the farm, you get evicted. You lose your entire livelihood. And we came to Parliament, we took to the street, we protested at the gates of farmers. We went, and I remember what Kusatu really had our back, and I must salute you, Comrade Tony, when we went to the streets, when we protest, when we went to the gates where there was this massive evictions, we could call on Kusatu for support, and they were there. The same last year when people on state farms received eviction notices, we called on Kusatu, Western Cape, and they were there, and people are still in their homes. I really believe in collaboration and solidarity. Sikula Sonke was never a Kusatu affiliate trade union. We decided to keep our independence, and I think it was a good thing to do, but whenever we called on the Trade Union Federation, they were there. And for me, that's all about worker solidarity. We had a campaign on decent work and decent lives. And decent work and lives is not only about labor and earning a decent salary. It's living in a good, proper house, having enough food to eat, you know, because Getreida Bartman, a farm worker from Ceres, who went to England telling Tesco, the biggest buyer of South African fruit, how can I live a life of dignity if I have to beg to stay alive, because farm workers earn amongst the lowest wages in the country. And the contradiction is the fact that farm workers feed the nation, hence they often struggle to feed themselves and their families. And I think if everybody can just see how important farm workers are. When we ate earlier the lovely grapes and all the fruit that was there, it's produced by the hands of farm workers. When we go on lunch, I see there's a nice finger lunch. When there's bread or coffee or whatever, it's produced by the hands of farm workers. So really, why I want to salute Comrade Ray and for being here, because she had a passion for farm workers. And as a former farm worker, I still live on a state farm today. There's so many challenges, but we're not powerless. We've got the rights. We can exercise our rights. When men joined our union, and Comrade, you also referred to the whole issue of violence, and I believe, Comrade Ray, I think she must have been a feminist, because if you believe in women's liberation, you must be a feminist. And I would like to call myself a feminist, really believing in women's liberation, in women equality. In my trade union, men had to sign a declaration. They had to wear white ribbons at our Congress, saying that they will not commit to any violence against women. And I think for us, that was very important, because we see the levels of violence in our country. We see the high levels of violence against women. We see the high levels of violence against women workers, sexual harassment, and different forms of violence that we really need to combat. I would like to pay tribute to the advice officers who's really doing marvelous work. Where the unions can't, when we look at socio-economic rights, and the unions focusing mostly on labor, it's the advice office stepping into that space and looking at the other issues affecting women workers and women in general in our communities out there. They are providing, most paralegals in advisors offices provide a free service to our communities, and they organize the workers who are unorganized, because a large portion of workers are not organized, especially when you go into the deep rural areas. That's where the advice officers are, the hands and feet of government on the ground. In closing, it's an honor. I did say it's an honor to be here. And I'm paying tribute to a hero who made a mark in the labor movement. Wow, dit wil gedoen wees. As ons kyk wat gedoen was, en dat ons vandag bou op daai fondasie. Regtig waar. Ek weet van die MaRay Alexander Museum. I was interviewed about her a few years back, and I was very honored to be interviewed. So one day when my daughters are big and they decide to belong to trade unions, they must know the story of Comrade MaRay Alexander. She laid the foundation, showing us that giving up is not an option, showing us women can lead. Wachincha bafazi, wachincha bakodo, igamala makosi kasi, malibangwe, Pambili Women's Rights, Pambili. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wendy. Wow. What an interesting intervention. I think through your intervention, in reflection of MaRay's life and what she stood for, you've done that very well. But also sharing with us how, as Sikula Sonke, you have actually led by example in protecting and defending the rights of working women through the process actions that you had done, but also how you worked collaboratively with other unions, particularly COSATU, to ensure that those rights of women are actually protected and defended. You've raised interesting things. I'm sure I looked at Tony. I couldn't read what his face was saying when you talked about the leadership of women in the labor movement, and particularly COSATU's SG and president. I said, wow, when are they going to Congress? It will be very interesting how you can lobby women within the various affiliates of COSATU to make sure that they realize that fight. But also, you raised the issue of rights of seasonal workers, which in your own view, at some stage, even as labor movement, when we organize, it's a sector that we may not be focusing our attention on. Not that we don't do it, but I think you have raised it sharply, that it is important that we looked at that sector in terms of our organizational work. But I'm sure also for the parliamentarians who are here, in terms of the legislation that they pilot, that's one of the areas which I think they would also have to look at. You've also raised the issue of women's rights in general, beyond just rights of working women and the labor rights. How can we actually ensure that collectively in addressing those labor issues, we do not forget the other issues that affect women? But there are other issues, of course, that you have raised. I just picked those, and I thought it's important to flag them so that we don't forget them in our engagement. Thank you very much. Can we give you another round of applause? Now we are going to have Kim Jansen, who's going to talk to us on gender and social activist, media coordinator at NEDLEC. 60 years of gender struggles. Over to you, Mandy. I'm sure now you have relaxed. Cape Town is not different than Joburg.
So different.
It's just that we have got both the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic and the visible mountain, which becomes a symbol for when you want to give somebody direction. It's either on the other side of the mountain or on the other side. And sometimes it's cooler and it's warmer on the other side of the mountain. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Chair of the Women's Caucus, and my Chair, Comrade Lumka, and to the family and comrades here and guests. It really is a huge honor for those of us who don't live in Cape Town to come to Parliament and be quite overwhelmed that this beautiful building and this very important institution is an institution of the people now. And I think for those of you who are maybe used to it, it's not such a thrill. But when my sister and I came in this morning, we sort of paused and had a moment to think of the significance of what it means to be here, and also to be here to discuss women's issues. It's a wonderful initiative. I'm also very thrilled that today is the 7th of November. For those of you who remember, it's the 99th anniversary of the October Revolution. And it's an important thing to remember for women's struggles and for some of the victories that women had, that it was in that time that the idea of women's rights in terms of divorce, in terms of cohabitation, in terms of abortion were introduced. And those are very significant, empowering things for women. I mean, Lenin himself talked about the need to free women, to give them full access to the labor market, and to ensure that women had choices, that they didn't have to be at home raising children. And that's an important place, I think, to start the talk. I loved what Mr. Levy was saying about this young women arriving in our country and within days saying, why did we not celebrate the October Revolution? And who are these women who are coming out of laundries, and can we organize them? So it made me think, when I was reading her biography, what is it that inspires a 15-year-old, a really young woman, to be so confident and to be so socially aware? And are those conditions that we can build in our own country? So I think one of the big things was that Ray had very progressive parents, and specifically, she had a very progressive father. And I like the fact that we use the word feminist. I think it's important. We must claim that and we must honor it. And her father, she talks about how her father gave her the readings of Rosa Luxemburg and taught her about Jewish heroines and just encouraged her to read and to think and to write. And I think that role model of strong, progressive, feminist men in the lives of our young girls speaks volumes. It teaches so much about gender equity and about the role of men in society and the way that we think of those gender relations. So I think she was very privileged in that sense from a very young age. When I think about the country we live in and the conditions that many of our girls are growing up in, there's a lot that really breaks my heart. So I think many of us in this room take for granted the luxuries of reading and engaging in discussions. But a lot of girls in our country don't have that privilege. There's a story about a township in Cape Town called Endlovini, where there are 20,000 people and they have 380 communal toilets. 380 for 20,000 people. So aside from the human dignity, just how dangerous it is for these young women, the statistics show that since 2009, there have been 650 reported rapes in this area alone. But we also know from the research that only about 1 in 13 women report rape, and that between the years of 2011 and 2015, the rape victims who were confident to report their rape decreased by 20%. So the statistics just in this one small area here in Cape Town paint a very bleak picture of the kind of lives that our young girls are growing up in. So I think when we think about what are the kind of things we need to do, let's give people flush toilets. In fact, let's fast track discussions we have around land reform and make sure that just the most basic of human dignities are afforded to women and girls in this country. And I think we also need to look beyond the home, and let's talk about what's happening in our education system. Let's talk about the fact that we still have mud schools, that we still have children who are learning under trees, and that we still have a huge number of girls who are missing maybe a week of school every month because they don't have access to proper sanitary wear. So let's make that a basic need and provide them for those girls. And let's say our girls must have as much access to education as our boys do. There's a real need, and everybody knows this, to address the scourge of gender violence we have in our country. So I think there's some practical things we need to do. We need to prioritize specialized courts. We need to make sure that there are enough specialized courts in this country, that they are well equipped, that people are trained in those courts, and also that they're in the right areas, that they are not just in the big metros, but that women in outlying areas have access to justice for gender crimes. We must support the South African Police Service in ensuring that people are trained properly and that they know how to handle gender-based violence cases. We must make sure that our police stations are well equipped, that there are rooms, and there's everything that women need when they come to report. There's privacy, and there's sanitary wear, and there's fresh clothes. And so that women feel that they are being heard, and that they feel there's a space for them, and that we take responsibility as citizens in this country for making sure that what I think are practical things can be done, and can be done quickly. There's a saying about the labor market that says gender outcomes in labor markets do not reflect natural or objective differences between men and women, but rather reflect the outcome of discrimination and disadvantage and the behavioral reactions by workers and employers. So we've talked a little bit about some of the gender victories we've had, and I don't think we should undermine them. There's a lot of really progressive gender legislation that has come through in this country. And I won't go into all of the big ones, but some of the things which I think are useful to highlight are the codes. So for example, we have a code of good practice which protects women who are pregnant and who have just given birth. We have a code of good practice on sexual harassment in the workplace. And we have a code of good practice on equal pay for work of equal value. So in this country, I don't know how many people know, but the gender pay gap is around 15 to 17%, which means women have to work an extra 2 months every year to earn the same amount of money as their male counterparts. So let's deal with that. Let's look at that practically. I think it's also very useful, and the colleagues have talked about the CCMA, and I think the CCMA is one of the most progressive institutions that we've established, because the CCMA gives a voice and gives access and gives power to the most vulnerable people in the labor market, and those are largely women, and we need to celebrate that. But progressive policies and legislation on their own is not enough. The very gendered picture of the labor market tells us that we still have much work to do. So the unpaid work sector is largely women. The care sector, which is either unpaid or severely underpaid, is largely women. And those are the sectors where we are taking care of other vulnerable sectors. The care sector that looks after the elderly and looks after orphans is a highly exploited and unrecognized sector where women continue to work, often for the lowest pay, because they take care of our society. Domestic work is an extremely vulnerable sector, a difficult sector to organize, a very low-paid sector. The sex work sector is very difficult to organize, very difficult to protect those women who deal not only often with legislative issues, but also with the stigma of working in that sector. And I think one of the things that we need to specifically look at is, do we have enough labor inspectors in this country? The simple answer is no. So we don't have enough people who are going around and saying, Are people complying? Are employers playing their role? So let's just not assume that everybody has the same gender progressive outlook that we do. Let's not assume that everybody believes in decent work and a living wage. And let's say we need to make sure that we have enough labor inspectors. I understand the labor inspector posts have now been frozen. We need to make sure that we have enough labor inspectors to protect those people in the very vulnerable sectors who are women in our country. The untransformation of workplaces where men continue to dominate middle and upper management levels means that culture in workplaces generally remains unfeminized. And I think we must believe that a more equitable gender representation in the labor market will help to change the culture generally in society and deal with issues such as sexual harassment, sexual violence, and jobs for sex practices, which we all know are very widespread. So one of the things I love that Mr. Levi said is, what are the practical things? Ray was a practical person, and I like to think of what are the low-hanging fruits, what are the practical things that we can do as feminists who want to transform society and want to transform our workplaces. So I think firstly we need to start by saying we must acknowledge that women in the workplace have more than one job, and that women are burdened with full childcare responsibilities as well. So let's think of making childcare accessible, making it affordable, and maybe saying, are there more employers who could, for example, build creches into their workplace situations so that women don't have to choose, and these are women largely who work for men, right? So that women don't have to choose between having to take care of a sick child and feeling vulnerable about the future of their employment. I think we also need to start thinking about feminizing our public spaces. So let's think about accessibility, about who walks in our suburbs, and do we have pavements that will accommodate prams and wheelchairs? So can we think about the disabled sector and women who work in the disabled sector specifically? Can we think about public transport? So can we make public transport more accessible? Can we make it cheaper and more affordable? And can we make the hours of public transport service the need of women who work long hours, or, for example, municipal workers who start working very early in the morning? Can we make sure that our public spaces are safe, that they are well lit, that women have access to parks and recreation centers, and that women can go to these places without always feeling vulnerable? We also need to look at some of the big policy issues. So I work for a social dialogue institution, and I wanted to flag 3 big policy issues that are on our radar. So in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we are expecting government to table the comprehensive social security policy at NEDLAC. And I think we need to ask as feminists, what is the gender approach to this? Because that body of policies is going to affect women. And we need to think very carefully as feminists, are these the most progressive policies, and are they really going to help the most vulnerable in our society? The second issue we need to think about is the national health insurance. So I think we need to keep a gendered eye on that and make sure that it's affordable and that it's accessible and that it's well-resourced, because this is something really important for the poor, for women, and for young children. And then the third big policy issue is we are expecting before the end of the year to make an announcement on the national minimum wage. And I think this is going to be a very important discussion to say, how will a national minimum wage affect exactly these sectors that we are talking about? What impact is it going to have on domestic workers? What impact is it going to have on the unorganized? What impact is it going to have on vulnerable workers? And specifically, how do we enforce that? How do we make sure that a national minimum wage makes a meaningful impact on the huge levels of poverty and inequality and unemployment we face in our society? And then lastly, I think We speak a lot about the wonderful things in South Africa. So we talk proudly about our constitution and about our body of labor legislation. And we should be proud of that. And I think we should be sending a very strong message to the world that this country will not tolerate any kind of oppression of women, and that this country is cognizant of what is happening around the world. I have particular concern about countries that are in conflict and where rape is being used as a weapon of war. And I have concerns about the conversations we're having about South Africa's role in international peacekeeping and our role in international justice processes. And I think we need to have serious conversations about that. And we need to take our strong history of feminism in this country, and we need to lead those global discussions. So in many ways, our country has come far in gender progressive legislation. We have started to recognize the daily struggles that women face and the systemic gender problems that characterize our country. But at the same time, so many of our young girls are raised in the most abnormal of conditions, and we need to address that. We need to be the Ray Alexanders who see a problem and immediately spring into action. We need to ask those difficult questions. We need to free the girls and the women in our country so that we can continue the spirit of Ray Alexander and free us all. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you very much for your intervention. Interestingly, you came at it in a different way. You left the history because it was already given by others and spoke about the present. On what are the challenges that women, and more particularly young women, still face, while appreciating the strides that have been made, but what are those other issues that we need to do? And in your intervention, it was very interesting for me because you took the age of MaRay when she started activism, asking very pertinent question as to why would a 15-year-old become so socially aware, understanding what the problems of her society was, but also being spurred into action to do something. That was very interesting for me. That brought in the issue of men into the equation, not just about activists in general, but their feminist part. What can they do? But I think the other issue you raised was what can we do as within our families to ensure that we bring children that are socially aware of their conditions and that are spared to actually do something to change those conditions. With the environment in which we come from as a country, but I think what you were raising for us is that the struggle is not yet over. We haven't yet reached that better life. We have walked some miles, but we're not yet there. How do we make sure that that activism, particularly from our children, is still important so that they too can play a role in changing our society? You also raise very interesting issues, in my view, on the unfinished agenda. What are the things that we still need to do? Issue of land reform, and I was actually smiling because I know Ruth has worked in the space, still works in that space in some way, and therefore should be able, as the first person to make an intervention, to make some reflections. But also you put it in a very interesting way, and I think it's one of those issues that, in my view, maybe as a society, but particularly as this parliament, when we reflect on the land reform issue, to come at the point at which you have come as a social justice question. How do we ensure that each one of our members of society can have shelter that he or she calls home? Issue of human settlement, while using the issue of sanitation, came up to the fore for me to say, how can we comprehend 2016 in South Africa today, that you still have conditions that in themselves create vulnerability, particularly for young girls and women, and that continue to encourage in some way gender-based violence, but also the other issue raised about the justice system, particularly our police service and police centers in particular. How in their architect can assist or not assist women to be able to report, the crimes. I mean, what was interesting, the case of Ndlovana community, how, there has been the decreasing reportage of gender-based crimes. And what you were also proposing that what we need to do. The issues that affect young women, and I was really young women and women, I was very happy when you raised the issue of sanitary towels, because the women members of parliament seated here, they had a very heated debate with the Treasury one time calling for zero tax on sanitary products, and they are still continuing with that agenda. And I think what you also raised, which maybe we have not been paying attention to, is the issue of the the wage gap between men and women in the workplace that still exists. But also your own articulation of today triple challenges that women continue to face, even though you raised two, that when woman goes to work, is not just going to work, you still have to think about your children. And I imagine a number of women here, not only children, but also that care, sector that we are talking about, because if you're not thinking about the children, you think about the aunt or the uncle or the brother who's not well, who all are looking at you to give them support. You also, lastly, gave us some of the practical things of what could be done immediately. I'm sure a number of people here will actually also engage and contribute with your intervention. But I must say, thank you very much. You gave an interesting reflection of the 60 years of gender struggles in South Africa. In a way, saying, drawing from that 60 years, some of those challenges, while we have met, they are still continuing. There are some new ones that we need to engage with. Thank you very much. Let's give Kim another round of applause. Now is the time for all of us to speak. The presenters have given their reflections. I will start with Ruth, whom I've put as my first speaker, followed by Meme Mela, followed by Mayengini, and I will open it up. Over to you, Ruth.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. It's good to see you. And it's an honor to be here and to be asked, I must say, at the last minute, if I would put some thoughts together, given that Mersha Andrews isn't here. So as you can see, I'm not Mersha Andrews. But if she were here, she would say, organize, organize, organize. And I think that all that I would like to say is to amplify some of the points put forward, particularly by Leon and by Wendy, about the ongoing challenges, despite enormous achievements in the area of formal law, but the real challenges facing rural women and women who work in the production of our food. The limitations of conventional forms of labor organization have become all too apparent in the past 20 years. Because at the same time that these enormous strides in the legal framework were achieved to protect workers and to extend the protection of workers to farm workers in the 1990s, we had economic trends that led to the hemorrhaging of jobs, massive casualization. So what Wendy's been describing is very much the imaginative and energetic response of activists to the creation of what we're calling now a precariat, this large population of people who are not workers, who sometimes are farm workers as casual workers, but might also be working in construction, or might be commuting to a town and being domestic workers, or maybe sex workers. How does one even think about organizing this precariat around not just their labor rights, but their rights to a livelihood and to a secure place to live. And I think that what we've heard is that what has emerged in response are a very diverse array of social movements that organize not only on the basis of who you are as a worker, but around where you live and what is required to create a life of dignity. What we've heard about is the example of Sekula Sonke, but I want to mention a few others that are interesting around the country. And some of these are very much hidden from view. I think that a lot of political debates around labor issues, around women's issues, tend to be very urban-centered. And even when we think of the rural, are often thinking of the commercial farming areas of farm workers. But crucial decisions are to be made still about how to address the anomalies of the rights of women in communal areas and of the former Bantustans in South Africa. There are the issues raised by the traditional courts bill, which in its previous incarnation would have treated women as minors in a judicial process. We have traditional councils that have been created, which in a sense have supplanted what used to be tribal authorities, where in fact the vast majority across the country have not complied with legislation and consist only of unelected and overwhelmingly male traditional leaders. These traditional councils reproduce exactly the boundaries of the former Bantustans. And if one looks at all the indicators of human well-being, whether it is quality of housing, level of education, access to clean water, and so on, and one overlays those over a map of South Africa, you will see that the most deprived areas of the country overlap perfectly on the boundaries of the former Bantustans. These are areas of deep deprivation, where it is women's labor, not just there, but as migrant workers in the city, that allow life to even continue to happen and for people to survive. So these continue to be labor-sending areas. So when we're talking about the conditions of women domestic workers in the cities of South Africa, those conditions that those women experience and what that means for the lives of their families are intricately connected with what's happening back at home, where there are struggles around how rural areas are governed and who governs. So there are groups like the Alliance for Rural Democracy, which has been fighting the traditional courts bill and will again become intimately involved in the discussion of how are the land rights of women in these areas to be addressed and confirmed, and what will be the power of traditional leaders. The current draft version of the Communal Land Rights Bill, Communal Land Tenure Bill, sorry, that's the other one. The Communal Land Tenure Bill proposes that land ownership be vested in traditional communities represented by traditional councils, rather than vesting the land rights in the occupiers of that land themselves. As Nomboniso Gasa has pointed out, why must I, as a woman who comes from a particular part of the country, not have the same rights of citizenship and of, to land as women in another part of the country? So that's another element of a women's struggle in South Africa, and one that I think is an ongoing challenge. It's part of another area in which we need to be dismantling the different systems that have constructed our own unique form of inequality. But there are new shoots of activism all over, and I think that one moment of inspiration that bears out in many ways the concerns that Ray built her life and work around was the farm workers' strike of 2012-2013. Because there you had a precariat. It was a revolt of that precariat. It wasn't organized entirely through formal unions. It was people saying, people who didn't even live on farms but lived in squatter camps adjacent to some of the most wealthy commercial farms, saying, we cannot live like this. And their demands were not only as workers for living wages, their demands were for a secure place to live, for livelihoods, in fact. So they went far beyond. She would have been impressed, perhaps, by the very significant role that women played in that strike, and the fact that many of the organizers of the strike, in fact, were migrants from other countries. So the xenophobia that manifested in other parts of the country actually was not evident in the course of this strike, which was also, as I say, not just a workers' strike, but a revolt of people saying we cannot live like this, and we will organize around an alternative vision for our own lives. And a final thought about a sense that there is a new generation of activists, of gender activists, of activists across various fields, that, such as we saw in the farm workers' strike, I agree we're seeing in the Fees Must Fall movement, but who insist on a concept of intersectionality, that while struggles are being waged around issues of inequality, of race, of class, that struggles against patriarchy are in no way deferred, and that the struggle will be intersectional. So in conclusion, I've really appreciated the most inspirational talks from our presenters, and I think that what they signal is the way in which Ray's work and her life has been centered around trying to build pressure and efforts from below, working at farm to farm, working workplace to workplace, but always with a big vision of social change at a grand scale, through building imaginative alliances and building solidarity. So in that vein, I think that one of the critical questions we need to ask is where these activists are coming to camp outside the parliamentary gates. Is government listening? Is Parliament listening? And on these crucial pieces of legislation that will affect rural women and will be dealt with in the coming year or two, can we count on that solidarity? And I think many of these rural women's movements are very much hoping to build those links, particularly with our parliamentarians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I'm going to allow other members to make interventions. I will end with my parliamentarians so that they can hear the views and be challenged a bit. Any taker? Machesi? You look like you want to say something. You can say something.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the family of Ray. It is quite a privilege to be part of this, and I also want to thank the chairperson for making this possible. I'm very much inspired by the previous speakers about all different issues that they've raised. As a member of parliament, also sitting in the committee and being in the portfolio committee of women, I can relate to all the issues, and I know these are very pertinent issues that as women within the committee are standing by and making sure that we fight and the fight continues. I'm very much inspired by what I heard about Ray and what I briefly read about her. And what inspires me is the fact that she is one of those stallions that stood for what she believed in. She fought, and it didn't matter if she lost her job, because I could see that like a couple of times she had to lose her job because of her activist work that she did. And that can only be an inspiration to women who are feminists, not only feminists, but women who believe in equality, women's equality. We have been faced by many issues as South Africans. Mostly what has come through many times is the issue of education. As one of the speakers mentioned, the majority of women in South Africa, basically the population is 51% are women. And those are the ones that are actually affected by the poor conditions that we see in our societies. And it is one issue that I think is very close to my heart, the issue of education, because women empowerment starts there. The fact that you can be empowered and receive education, it goes beyond dealing with the issues of day-to-day, but it actually alleviates poverty. And to actually also emphasize the issues that have been raised by Kim. She brought issues that are very real to women, and she mentioned the low-hanging fruits that we have to look at. She spoke about childcare, which must be affordable, and I very much agree on that. This is an issue that we've also raised in Parliament, because I believe that if we start here in Parliament to address those issues and make sure that we highlight that it is possible to make child care affordable, in the sense that we have a child care center within Parliament, that will be something that can be taken over also by the private sector, to ensure that within their budgets that they make that possible, so that women can continue to be at work without actually being worried about losing their jobs, because they can't come to work as regularly as they can. She spoke about the issue of public transport. We know that women live in rural areas and even in urban areas whereby there's no access to public transport. Not only they have to pay for public transport because they live far from where their workplace is, but the fact that it is not affordable. Those are things that we have to debate about in Parliament as women. And also the safety of women in their areas. She spoke about the fact that there is no enough lighting, there is no recreation, safety parks, parks that are actually safe for women. So those are issues that we really have to bring forth, and also the issue of sanitary pads. The chair also mentioned that, like, as women within Parliament, we have raised this with Treasury, and we continue to highlight the fact that a lot of girls are unable to go to stay at schools for the whole month, purely because they cannot afford sanitary pads.
Okay, Honorable
thank you.
Member. Thank you. Me? Just press, there's in front of you, mic, there's symbol like a mouth there.
Thank you, ma'am. All this I hear, we talk about it, about development, about women, concerning the women issue. The point I want to take, according to myself, as long I work about young women, as in Saloni, I see some things terrible it can happen to those young women today. A 12-year child, a mother can take the child to the clinic to say the child can be injected to prevent the child cannot be pregnant. It's very dangerous things today, what I saw on my own eyes. Because it's something terrible, it's a twins today, what we call pregnancy and HIV positive. The time as mother, I expose my child on sending my 13-year child to the clinic to go to get injection. I don't know if I expose the child to sexual abuse or I prevent my child to getting sick. It's only small things I want to expose. And I thank you all.
Thank you, Ma.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I just want to share with the House something that I've been personally involved with. I'm from FAU, Food and Allied Workers Union, and we've been involved with a project with the IUF, the International Union of Food Workers. And I had the opportunity to go to a lot of the sugar plantations in KZN and in Mpumalanga. And I think we can all agree that a lot has to be done for farm workers, especially women farm workers. And what I've seen on some of these sugar plantations are actually horrific. We went there to talk to women workers especially, and we asked them, what do you want to talk about? And they said, equality, equity, sexual harassment. Every farm we went to. And what we saw was that some of these women were sexually harassed on a daily basis by the male workers, people that they work with every single day. And there was one lady who actually came to me and said that she went to the farmer to tell him about it. But because the male that she was accusing of this sexual harassment had some supervisory position, The farmer actually squashed it and told her that she will lose her job, she should stay quiet about it, nothing's going to happen. And she actually implored us as the union to actually help her. And it was sad to see that in this day and age, that women were scared to actually go and talk to, you know, the boss that they are working for. Some of these female workers live 4 to a room. And some of the older ladies who were over 50 years old actually came to us and said that when one of their fellow workers leave and a new younger woman was employed and had to move into their room, they had to share the experience of the younger female having, you know, sexual relations with their boyfriends because there was nowhere else to go. I think we can agree that ablution facilities that are required by females are vastly different to those from males. But on all of these farms, the toilets are standard. There's no difference. And even when the female workers complain to the farmer, it just falls on deaf ears. Some of them complain that when they go on maternity leave, they do get paid their wages, but it's only a quarter until they return to work. Others have told us that when they go back to their families on a Friday evening and they get to work late on a Monday, the farmer makes note of this and he actually deducts it from their wages. So there's a lot that needs to be done. There's loads of work that needs to be done, especially when it comes to female workers on the farms. I just thought I'd share that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Mutlatsi Tsubane from Kosatu. Chair, I just want to come in on a few things raised by the previous speakers, because they are very much important issues that they have raised in terms of what is happening in our country. But before I can do that, Chair, I think I must appreciate the chairpersons of the portfolio committees who are here. But I think it was also going to be very much important if not all, the portfolio committee chairpersons or people representing those portfolio committees to be here in this particular event. In particular, the portfolio around justice and police. Because I think those two portfolios are very important. They should have been here. Chair, I just want to raise a few things. I think the living conditions of the majority of farm workers in our country, in particular in the Western Cape, is quite appalling. They live in conditions that are not conducive for human beings. And until such time we would make it a point that we deal with that situation in a very radical way, things will not change. It cannot happen whereby 22 years in our democracy, we still find a situation whereby our people are living in those kind of conditions. It's totally unacceptable. And I think the Department of Labor, they need to deal with that thing, including us as unions. We need to take up those issues in a much radical way and active. Chair, I also want to raise some few issues around the issue raised by the comrade there around the police stations, accessible the facilities in police stations, whereby when there are women who have been raped and all the sexual harassment and all that stuff. I think those facilities are there in police stations. We have sexual offense courts in our court. I wouldn't say all the courts, but the majority of our courts in the country, we do have sexual offense courts whereby we deal with this sexual offense cases. But I think one thing that is lacking from the Department of Justice is to promote this courts or these facilities to the rural areas in particular, so that people know that there are those facilities and they must report those offenses immediately when that happens, so that at the end of the day, the culprits must be brought to book. Those facilities are there, but it's just a question of them to be promoted properly to to our people in those rural areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Let me just accept the criticism that we might not have invited all the chairpersons. Singabasoli baba, itine singabamemanga. Unfortunately, Monday is also a constituency day, so others are in their constituency. So I will take that for the future so that we are able to address it. Me?
My naam is Edwina Abrams, ek is van Elsenburgplaas. En as 'n ouer voel ek transport vir kinders op die pad skool toe is baie gevaarlik. Want in laas jaar was ons kinders bly ver van die skole af. En in laas jaar het my kind was in 'n busongeluk gewees. En niks was vir ons gedoen tydens die busongelukkie. Ons kinders, daar was die genade na ons ouers toe in verband met die busongelukkie. Daar was die insurance vir ons kinders. Van die kinders was geen soor wat ernstig seer gekry het. Maar van die wat nie ernstig seer gekry het nie, was nie geïnsureer. So die bus word nie gedek vir die hele kinders nie. En ek voel die regering moet iets omtrent die skoolkinders doen om hulle te insureer vir die bus op pad skool toe. Want as 'n ouer voel jy as jou kind miskien gesterf het in die ongeluk, wat sal gebeur het? Niemand nader vir jou nie. En ek voel as 'n parent moet jy daar wees vir jou kind en jy moet jou kind op pad skool toe, moet jy elke dag dan sê, om te sê, gaan skool toe, om nie te dink aan die ongeluk wat gebeur het nie. Want hulle het die berading gekry vir die ongeluk nie. So ek voel net, die kinders bly baie ver in reëntye, as hulle sop nat, daar is die bedekking waar hulle staan, om onder 'n dak te staan, hulle moet nat skool toe gaan. So daar word niks gedoen vir ons skoolkinders wat op die plase bly nie.
Issue of children in farms, in particular the distance they have to travel to school. Mary and then Tony, and then Pat and me.
I'm going to be very quick and just say to you, Wendy, the father goes back to the grandfather, if you like, it goes on. My grandmother went as a young girl with her sister, who was the older sister, to Birmingham and worked in a where's Tony? Piecework. Did piecework at home, but for the clothing sector. And she was summoned back to marry her cousin whose wife had died. So I'm just saying there's the traditional, and she was educated, she could speak English, and she came back, and he was a socialist. And one of the first things he did when he married her was not to allow her to have her head shaved, which was required. Okay? And so my mother grew up with that knowledge that what happened in the household did not necessarily reflect what was happening elsewhere. And chicken's blood were put on the sheets because he refused to show sheets that showed that she was a virgin or not. Okay. So it's that interface, if you like, between community and liberation within the household. So that's number one. Number two, the privilege I've had of growing up, and you too, in Cape Town, over the decades, I'm now old, is that I could understand my mother only in the 70s and 80s when I saw youngsters in Cape Town becoming involved in political activism. My mother was an activist from the age of 9. I know it sounds ridiculous, but she was elected to do work, talk about Palestine, which had just been formed, and was so offended by it, right, that she there and then declared herself hostile to the Israel, if you like, thing, and pro-Palestinian, which was other debates that would happen in our house. We'll leave that out. But the second, or the third thing I want to talk about, so politics is personal and the personal is political. It's really important. My mother could not have been who she was without my father. And I'm not trying to overemphasize it. There are a lot of women who know my family who discredit my mother's activities and make my father into some heroic figure, right? It's not, it's about a joint project which extended to the whole family doing the washing on a Saturday, everybody weeding in the garden, etc. You couldn't leave the house until there were chores that were done. Every night we walked on the mountain for two reasons. One, it was away from telephones and security. And two, it was a catch-up. Each child had a thing, but back, once you got home, it was back on the machine. I only discovered when I went to university that people didn't have to go to bed at 9 o'clock. Now you may think, what, is she mad? She was 18 years old. My mother had us all in bed, no later, lights out, because that's when she wrote, all right? So it's about kind of internal discipline that's making the home. And I'm going to end off with Ruth Mpati, who gave me a lecture when I was part of UCO and said you cannot harvest maize unless they all fruit at the same time. Why? What was she saying to me? Unless you liberate and emancipate men, you cannot have freedom for women. All right. And that is, when I talk about COSATU, we won't get there, but I absolutely endorse what you're saying. It's very nice that they've come to the party. My mother used to get hysterical about trade unionists who would sexually harass, foremen in factories who would sexually harass, right? And she fought, and I don't want to mention names, but there were union members in her union that she would take to task. And because she was underground, we were privy to those conversations. But if you want to have a private conversation with me about it, I will tell you how to strip men down to size about stealing money and harassing women. Okay, it was a non-negotiable for her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Tony?
That's a hard act to follow, Mary. But I want to latch on by the point that you've made, that the private is political. Because ultimately, and in this case we look at Ray Alexander's life, it's good people who do good things, because it's those private virtues inside your heart that shapes the public policy that you want a country and an organization to advance. And so it's great people like Ray Alexander and her family and many of the comrades who formed our movement as we knew it. And it was their virtues that guided our organization. And so today when we have a conversation about Ray Alexander and an incredible contribution, we must take a moment to thank her family, to thank her comrades, because we are all the repositories of those that we know. We don't just emerge automatically. It's those who spend time and shape our lives. But when we honor them, we would not be sufficient without living up to their values. And to today, as we come together in Parliament, to honor Ray Alexander and all that she's done, and we talk about how far we've come as a country and the horrendous difficulties we've been overcome, we must appreciate that there's still a lot that needs to be done, and the democratic parliament has a huge responsibility to do that, because they're the repository of the people. And so we must call on Parliament to reflect the values of Ray Alexander and many of those comrades, because this Parliament has become contaminated by theft and greed and corruption, and we must speak against that, because unless we speak against that, we won't be able to achieve any of the ambitions we've set for ourselves at the dawn of our liberation, and that's captured in the Freedom Charter. So today, as we honor Ray Alexander, we must rededicate ourselves to what must be done, but we must remind ourselves that we need only take forward the heroes and sheroes of our movement and act in pursuance of their ideals, and all of the great liberation promises we've made to our people will be realized. But thank you to Ray, and thank you to her family and comrades. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tony. Pat?
Thank you very much, Chair. I really want to appreciate the opportunity to speak in this occasion, just to remember Comrade Ray of the contributions that she made in our struggle, and just to say that she is a pillar of strength to some of us who came as a generation, just 3 generations away from her. But also to appreciate that the family did support and give her support throughout the hardships. I mean, it was difficult for her as a woman to participate in the struggle to start with, and during those years. But it's still difficult for us as women to participate still in the struggle. Even when we came in the 80s, it was even more difficult. So the struggle of women, it's a very serious and engaging struggles. It takes a toll on you as a person. It takes a toll on you psychologically. It takes a toll on you even physically. So I really applaud her energy, her resilience, I mean, to sit there and move on with the vision that she had throughout. And that's what gives us courage. I mean, we also have great women like Charlotte, who were never even recognized, you know, with their enormous participation in the struggles. And there are many heroines that are not going to be recognized in our struggle. And it is good that Ray managed to be recognized as a comrade and a very positive issues that she outlined in the struggle. But what I wanted to raise was the deeper issue that is embedded in our struggle, the issue of patriarchy. And that, I think I agree with her, that as long as our male folks are spectators, we will never achieve our freedom. We are just walking on the same steps, you know, over and over again. We're not going to achieve it. You know, the saddest thing is that the system of capitalism has captured men. I must use the word capture because that is the D word. That's the buzzword so that people can understand me properly. It has captured men in such a way that they don't see a woman as a human being. I mean, it starts there. So as long as they don't see women as human beings, they see them as commodities, we will never get anywhere. So the issue of dignity of women and the issue of poverty, inequality, and unemployment has to be classified also in terms of classes. The issue of class, we always talk about the poor, but we forget that, because as long as we don't deal with these classes separately with how each woman is affected in each and every class, that is why women that are in the upper class will never see themselves as participants of this struggle of women, because we never touch their issues. You know, it's exactly the same issue as race. How are we not able to organize other racial groups into the struggles? It's because we're not touching the issues that affect these different sectors. So we're going to speak in circles. As long as you don't attack the gist of the matter. Let's take the issue of the Land Act, the 1913 Land Act, to start with. If we have to address South Africa's problem, we must start there. The results cultivate in those areas. And we have been saying people have been pushed in dry areas. They are sitting there doing absolutely nothing. As long as people are not given arable land, we will always complain. We will always complain about these things. So now what I will say Comrade Ray will do is to push that we must change the whole system in totality and come up with new ways. Our education system is not equipping our kids to address the problems that we have in our country. Take sociology, for instance. You always learn about an American society and what are their problems. We never learn about the South African society and how we can solve our South African problems. So the issue of content in the syllabus that we learn in schools does not educate our people to solve the problems that they encounter on a day-to-day basis. So as long as we don't do that, we'll see it going around in circles and circles, because our education must teach our boys that there is a value in human life that is a woman. And I always give an example of a human being, that our economic system throughout the world says they collapse and do all this economic crisis. But there is this 52% of the population that does not participate in the economic sphere. So if you have a body that has 52% that is unhealthy, and you have men that is 46%, which is part of your body, and you say you'll have a healthy economy, you'll never have a healthy economy. That is why we're sitting one crisis after a crisis of economic crisis. So let us wake up and just taste the coffee and say, this is not working. Let's get something that can work for us, both male and female, and say to male people, come on board. There is nothing to lose. They are afraid to lose something, privileges. There are no privileges that they are going to lose because we enhance each other. There is no way we can work with each other. So they can't exclude women, and they expect us to sit there and fold our arms. So what I can say Ray can do today is to change the lives of all people, male and female, and work together in changing that life and
dismantling.
Yeah, dismantling.
And reconstruct.
Yes, and constructing a new South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ma. Yes, and I'll come to you, and then I'll come to the last two. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity for being here. I'm so sad that I missed the first few speeches, but I had another meeting, which was also very important for women. So this is one of the things that we've got to divide ourselves. I want to associate myself with my colleague who has just spoken, and with her expression that we have to educate males and females. This is an enormous problem, but I also just want to say that it occurs in all aspects of society. And abuse and patriarchy is not limited just to one sense. And I think we need to bind ourselves together and say we speak for one another and that we work for one another. The girl child has got should have just as many opportunities as the boy child. And this is something that I always advocate too. The fact of 4 people sharing a bedroom was mentioned. I agree, it's not wholesome, it's not acceptable. But can I tell you that when I visited a hospital near Butterworth, Madweleni Hospital, there were nurses who were sleeping in a garage, and there were 6 of them in that garage, and they were separated by curtains. Now that sort of lack of privacy for anybody is totally unacceptable. And the washing facilities, and these were people that had to deal with health. There wasn't adequate water supply. So I think we must look all over, and these are labor conditions all over, that we have to say, are our people who are working, whether they are workers on the fields or whether they are nursing other people, we've got to look at those conditions all over. The sexual offences courts, I agree with you, we have some, but not nearly enough. I come from the old Transkei, so I know what those conditions were like, and I grew up there as a child, and this is where my own awareness of the inequality came about, because I went to a decent school, and where were my friends? But we've got to look at the sexual offences courts. Yes, I agree with you, we should report those offences immediately, But if you are broken physically and emotionally, how are you going to get yourself to that police station or to that court when it is so far away? I've been speaking up in Parliament and elsewhere as well for a long time about the fact that our FCS units are not adequately resourced. Those sexual offences units, there are too few policemen who have to cover a very wide distance. Their transport is not adequate. So we've got to come back to resourcing again. And are we putting the needs of the people first, or are we actually just looking at red tape and hierarchy? Women of all personalities, areas, parts of the country need to know that they can be safe. So those are things that I'm passionate about, and I really want to say that the values of society, the values of Ray Alexander and Madiba and various other people, those women of 56, very often those values are being subjugated into other areas. So we should unite, and I value this opportunity, and I'm sorry that there weren't more people invited, but we can achieve a lot as long as we look at one another as not coming from different parties or different areas or do whatever, as women, the people who bring life and who nurture life. And it's up to us to do what we can to make the South Africa that is now free even better in all respects. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Enkosi mhlali ngaphambili. Igama lami ndinguntombi ekhaya Sikhondo ndisuka kwe-ANC Women's League. I want to add kwinto besezithethiwe. Okokuqala amakhosikazi afa indlala. Esifa indlala amakhosikazi ahlala kwindawo ezingakhuselekanga. For example, bekumentionwe iNdlovu. It's fortunate it's my area. Apho ufika abantwana abancinci 18 years bangamanikazi bamakhaya abazali baswelekile because of HIV and AIDS. So how do we rescue these young children that are heading the homes? And also uComrade undikhavarishile kasithi xa kufundiswa kufuneka kufundiswe amakhosikazi ngenodada, because these young children, especially girls, they are victims zamadoda abaphela beziblessa kwaba bantwana. They promote le HIV and AIDS ne teenage pregnancy because akho mntu uzokwazi ubasupporta ezindlini. And also umcimbi we-informal settlement kwi-area esihlala kuzo, apho kungekho toilets, apho kungekho mbane, apho umuntu ongumama xa zazinceda funeke ahambe aye ehlathini okanye kusetyenziswe ipotapota. Apho izinga le-rape li-too much, ezinye ziyaripotwa, ezinye ziripotwa, ezinye abantu i-victims zabribwa because umuntu makahamba yovala i-case. So how do we assist i-areas zethu, especially kwi-townships? Even i-health facilities zethu, for example, i-Khayelitsha hospital, if you're going there, you find out patients on the floor, there's no enough beds for patients. Abanye bayafa, inkathalo ayikho. I'm talking about the province, the current province esikuyo. So, zizinto even ezikolweni abantwana bethu abekho safe. Abantwana bethu bayaxhulwa ezikolweni under supervision teacher no principal. But because there's no security, there's no fence, there's no gates, izikolo zivulekile umuntu ungena nakwephi kona afuna ungena kuyo. Unomcimbi wasecourt abantu bethu abakhilelwanga luhlobo kusetyenzwa ngalo ecourt, ingakumbi omama uyahlukunyezwa, uyabaleka uya ecourt, uyaphinda sofike ecourt. Umanki okhona, the most yobumanki bakhona bangabotata, and into yokuhlukunyezwa kwamama kuba ungumama ungawuqondi umcimbi wasecourt awuthathwa serious. Uphela ugoduka uyaphinda uthi somkile ecourt unikwe elo phepha lo protection order ufike ubulawela endlini. Currently sine case iyavela ngomso utata ona 50 years old ohlukumeza abantwana bangamantombazana abangamakhwenkwe abayi-20 uyavera ngomso ecourt eKhayelitsha. But even i-case idregwa for uba masiphelelwe ngumonde ukuyisupporta from August namhlanje usa-aplayishela ibail. Because abazali, they are poor. They cannot afford to have igqwetha kwenzeba icase ispeed up sibone umangalelwa uyatshona uphelela etrongweni. Zizinto kufuneka zinjalo kufuneka sizive. It's not only farm workers, even kwi-areas sihlala kuzo, even omama abasuka ngaphandle kwamanye amazwe nothi apha eSouth Africa bayi-exploitwa because abakazukhalaza because bafuna imali noba yenjani na because bafuna urenta indawo bahlala kuzo. Bathathwe advantage. Zezinto kufuneka sizijongile uba how do we assist i-system esisaphila kuyo, especially apha eWestern Cape. Enkosi mhlawumbe ngaphambili.
Enkosi ma. Firstly, I must apologize that we don't have the translation, unfortunately, today. But the issues that she was raising were issues, generally, some of which have already been covered, that need to be addressed. Issues of gender-based violence, issues of access to justice, particularly how women could be assisted in the court system, and in that raising the issue of the transformation of the judiciary. That at times that in itself becomes a hindrance, because if the magistrate is a man and you don't even know how the court system works, you may get intimidated and therefore not be able to articulate yourself better. Issues of legal aid assistance that is not accessible to all, which then hinders those who are poor to have accessibility to lawyers and thereby access to justice. Those were the issues she was raising. Issue of security, particularly in schools where young girls become victims to attacks within the school environment because those are not themselves secure. Issues of the health, the care sector, which was raised in the intervention by Kim, particularly those people who have to look after the sick and the infirm, and the issues of healthcare for women. So those were generally the issues that she was raising in her intervention. Tanya?
Thank you. I'm going to be speaking a little later to thank our speakers and our gracious host for the opportunity to have this occasion honoring our mother. But it seems to me, I'm so delighted to see so many women here and so many women who are articulating very firmly the problems that are faced in our country. It seems to me that there needs to be another march on the union buildings. Really. I think this is really necessary. I'd like to thank my sister very much for her contribution and for stimulating my memory. We grew up in a remarkable home surrounded by the presence of strong women. Our mother, of course, Dora Tamana, Katie White, Annie Selinga, and many, many others. We saw our father cook and wash dishes. We did things communally, like collecting sour figs for the making of sour fig jam. We were disciplined. If we arrived at the breakfast table not fully dressed, we were fined. We had to put money in a blue box. Shoes could not be bought unless there was an entire gathering of the family and you had to produce the shoes and explain to everybody why it was necessary, in fact, for you to get shoes, a new pair of shoes, which probably explains why I'm a bit of a shoe fetishist at the present moment. We were really fortunate living in this remarkable family. And I'm going to speak a little further later on, but I'd like to thank you all very much for your contribution. Really, this has been a most inspiring gathering, and I should think it should be repeated, if possible.
Thank you, Tanya. She just thought she needed to make a brief intervention. She's still going to thank all of us, as she said, but I wanted her to share with you the shoe story. Yes, yes.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm Sylvia from Progressive Women Movement of South Africa. Thank you very much for the invite, though we just got it just 10 minutes and then I was called just to come and attend. So what I can say is that we know very well, it reminds me when we talk about the issues of land this weekend when one was a rapporteur and it was like, we said, us as women, we must know that we are perfect because it started by God himself. When God thought of creating a human being, he started by creating man. And you know very well that everything that you start with it as a draft. and you only come out with something perfect after making a draft. So we mustn't always look at ourselves down, because God has just given us those powers to say that we are real human beings. So whatever men are doing to us, we must just know that it's still a draft. Then we need just to fine-tune them and show them the right way. And to the speakers, because the theme of today is, what will Ray Alexander do if she landed in South Africa in 2016? What she will do to us today is that if we don't do the right thing at the right time, like as she was finding the children of not coming in a proper way to breakfast, to lunch, that put money in the blue box, he will do that to us as women of South Africa today. And I would like also to support the woman there from the Sikula Sonke, when you say that it is good that now, or it is time now, that when we talk about the secretariat part of it or the presidential part of it, we must, in the working class, especially in COSATU, because one has been there for quite a long time, we see that the problems that we are encountering as women, they are very much painful, because one is from the mining sector, where we were going underground, and the harassment is there. And that you were told that you cannot do this as a woman, but when coming to light duty, you know in COSATU, that when you come into mining industry, when we talk of light duty, most of the people that are there are men, and because they're given money, they come and say to themselves that they can clean the offices. But when we are at home, the people that are cleaning is women. But when we talk of light duty of a woman who's pregnant, to say that she can come and do the filing, you will say, no, she's pregnant, she's sick. Of course, pregnancy is not a sickness. Then we will say to the land issue, when you talk about the land rights, it is the fight of us women to say that in order for us to emancipate women, let us try to educate our women. If we get our RDPs, because you get the RDP because you qualified for that, let us try to teach them how to use the land that they are given. The land that you are allocated, you can't buy the cabbage and the tomato and everything. It must start there. To say that in order for us just to live, because if you want to put something on the table, if you can get pap, because that is our stable food, then for the cabbage and the tomato, with the very same small yard that you are given, then try to do something. Because it started with us in progressive when we say 1 woman, 1 hectare. Because you know that when a woman talks, sometimes they will come and say, no, we don't say that. Now it is taken to be 1 household, 1 hectare, but it started by us. So you know that always they modify what we call. Thank you very much. And for Take Back the Night, we must all join hands when the latter speaker was talking about women who are working very late in the transport, to say that we've got a program of Take Back the Night where all women were gathering, and then to show that during the night a woman can walk. So let's support each other for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll now give my 2 chairpersons here to also make their reflections. Metandi.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much to the family of Ray. It's a pity because of patriarchy, men still look down on us. They think we can't be inventors of different platforms. We can't be leaders in the different fields. It's a dream. We are, and we're going to be anytime. I've been listening to most of the people talking here. It's up to us. I feel strongly that even with the courts, work is being done, but it's the people employed at times who just cheat. It seems as if, as human beings, we've actually lost the love for the next person. I'm talking as a veteran. We grew up where kids belonged to the community. But it's no more like that today. I can't actually try and correct the wrongs that are done by your child, you'll charge me. To the women seated here, I'm pleading, let's love each other, let's educate each other. Let's not look down on the next woman. And that is very common across the color line. If I haven't had a chance to be educated, why don't you bring me up? Not necessarily to the same level as you are, but try and pull me out of the dungeons. Young lady from the farms. That's part of the work we do when we're doing community work in the different areas where we come from. It's a pity. This indoctrination of a man is better than a woman is still working today. The tillers of the land are women. But when it comes to leadership, when the farmer leaves his farm, he then chooses a man, a young man, to look after the whole thing. And when we corner them, because at times they come to just check what is happening. I'm not being racist, but it's a fact, especially in the field where you are, mostly working. Women in farms are Western slaves. They're abused, and even when they go home, they still nothing. The Western kids, the husbands just push them around. Here in Cape Town, the accommodation of farm workers, whether they're seasonal workers or whatever, it's so appalling. And I can't understand the owners of those farms, whether they have consciences or not. And I think it's very good what the Labor Department is doing right now. Sit on them, charge them for the atrocities that are happening there. It's heartbreaking. But what do? Fight for our rights? Let's stand together and fight for our rights. Then our children will have a better future. Take over.
Melu Yeng.
Thank you, Chair. I also wish to join the speakers who were before me in thanking the family of Comrade MaRay Alexander-Simons for allowing her to be part of the struggle for liberation in South Africa. I've listened carefully to all the speakers, and everything about Comrade MaRay Alexander-Simons has been said. I listened to the description of who Comrade MaRay was how she contributed in building, molding, and nurturing our liberation movement. It is because of people like Comrade MaRay Alexander-Simons that we have a democratic society today. She was a real leader. She was unique. She was a giant. I'm not saying these words because I just want to impress. I am fortunate to be amongst those who have been serving under her leadership in SACTU, both herself and Comrade Simons, the husband. Comrade MaRay Alexander, despite the fact that she came from a community that was privileged in South Africa then, she did not join the struggle just to be popular. She joined the struggle with a purpose of liberating the poor and, in particular, workers and women. I don't know where people go when they leave us. I don't know. I am a Christian. I grew up under a Christian family. But I want to say, where she is, if she is looking at what we are doing as the alliance that she was part of, the alliance that is led by the ANC, that she was a leader of, not only in this new democratic South Africa, but during the time when we were still fighting for this democratic society. Definitely, she is not happy. She will not be happy, more especially because the COSATU that she contributed in bringing it into being today is no longer the same. The ANC that she fought under its guidance, as part of her guiding us, is also bleeding today. And it is because there are certain processes that we have flouted, the processes that were put by them to us as a weapon to keep the democracy that we fought for into shape and guide it until the last stage, the stage that is envisaged by the South African Communist Party.
she was extraordinary. I will keep on saying that. She was a humble someone. She was a mother to everybody. Today, we are where we are, thanks to their teachings, thanks to their guidance. Comrade Ray was not just a leader, she led by example, as all of the speakers have testified here. She was not a leader who sat in the office. She was a leader that was amongst the people who needed her at the time, the most vulnerable, the farm workers. I also want to mention that the national minimum wage that we are talking about today, that the workers of this country are going to experience in this term of this government, 5-year term, before the end of the 5-year term. It is not something that came by accident or something that came 2 years or 5 years or 10 years ago. It is an idea that was sponsored by Comrade Ray, Steve Dlamini, and many, Comrade Mabida. The list is endless. All those leaders who led in the trade union movement, who participated in 1955 when the Freedom Charter was molded and adopted. National minimum wage was sponsored there. And this 5th Parliament, it is going to put into practice what was envisaged in 1955 by the leaders of the caliber of Comrade Ray Alexander-Simons. I don't really want to waste your time. I am not part of the speakers, but of course, if I'm asked to talk, there's no way that I can say I don't know. I really don't need a research. It is thanks to Comrade Ray and the other leaders of our labor movement that today we have labor legislations that are looking at protecting the interest of workers at all costs. I do know that the Department of Labor is not perfect in implementation, like all other departments. For instance, one of the speakers alluded to the weakness of the inspectors of labor. It's a fact. As a portfolio committee on labor, we were aware of that issue. There's a challenge, the major challenge that I think it's a challenge that can be sorted within government. We have few, but that's not an excuse, because the few that we have, the department should use it to the best of its ability. Chair, I really wish that our organization or our alliance led by the ANC can produce as many Comrade MaRay Alexander-Simons as much as we can. We do have the capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Yengeni. I put you, both of you, with Mamtandi, last speakers, because as chairpersons, I'm sure you've got a number of agenda items that emerged from this discussion. Just to say that if one were to take our deliberation today from Dr. Leon, was in his reflection looking at what MaRay would have done if she landed today, particularly looking at the issue of women workers, particularly farm workers. I think we were able to expand on that reflections by acknowledging first and foremost that from where she started and where we are today, there are certain things that we have done to change the labor conditions of workers, to create a better framework in terms of labor relations. But we are also saying there is more that still needs to be done. I think all of us in different ways will raise that. But we're also, I think, in the intervention saying there's something that legislatures as members of parliament can do in their oversight work, in their responsibility as lawmakers, to what extent as we draft those laws, particularly those of us who are women parliamentarians, comb those clauses to see to what extent they address the needs of women. The other issue that we raised was, again, how do we continue with the gender agenda by ensuring that men becomes part of that struggle? And I think Sis Mary pointed it very nicely how MaRay, put it that unless our men are liberated, the struggle for gender equality will be a pipe dream. And I think what Sis Pat also raised with respect to the challenges of patriarchy that we still need to confront, again, still makes it a reality for us that the gender agenda is still not concluded. It's something that we have to continue. There were also intersectoral issues that emerged in this discussion, precisely because of the nature of the subject that we're dealing with. Issues of justice, issues of safety and security, issues of human settlement, issues of women's rights also emerged, which we all agree we need to deal with. And from ourselves as the organizing team, we'll ensure that those issues are actually given to the various committees in Parliament that has to deal with. The other issue that came out very clearly was how can we, in the way in which we conduct ourselves and we do our work, honor the values of Comrade MaRay and those of her generation that they stood for, that brought us to where we are today. And I think it's an important reflection, particularly where we are in our country, to really ask ourselves, are we still true to those values that they stood for? By what we do, particularly as members of parliament, members of the various legislature, but also as members of society who are Democrats. The other issue that came through was advocacy and solidarity. The work that we still need to continue both internationally and locally. And there were issues that Ray Hall raised, which I think as the Women's Committee and the Multi-Party Women's Caucus needs to reflect on. How do we ensure that we don't miss the boat with respect to the minimum wage. I know Comrade Lumka says there's work that they are doing, but it might be important also for the Women's Caucus to look at how is the woman's story weaved in that minimum agenda, particularly that we've been sensitized that there's still a gap in terms of wages between men and women to this day. The issue of traditional courts bill, issue of sexual offences bill, is something that even though it lies with the Justice Committee, but I think the Women's Multi-Party Caucus need to also examine and see to what extent those instruments are actually supportive to women and ensuring that women have access to justice. The issue of education again came up very clear, and also the issue of children and the distance that they have to walk to school. Issues of health also came up very sharply, and I think there was a matter of discussion which we might have to continue, particularly in the Women's Caucus. Issue of children's rights and the issue about accessibility of family planning for children at the age of 12. As a policy issue, is it having any unintended consequences? How can we actually manage this issue? I think the point that was raised. The issue of social movements and the role that they play in actually ensuring that they hold us accountable, but also they are able as instruments for social mobilization to ensure that indeed we attain the rights that were fought for. One of the things that came across from the discussion is that even in areas where we've got instruments such as legislation, but it still remains our responsibility in terms of activism to ensure that those laws are applicable, those instruments that have been put in place do work for women in particular, so that we're not just excited in terms of the milestone that we've traversed in terms of lawmaking, but how do those laws work in practice? Issues of application as raised by Memela and the role of the civil service. How do we build a civil service that is conscious of its duty and make sure that, you know, we indeed improve the citizens' life as we are committed to? Now this brings me to the last speaker for the day, who has to thank all of us. And after her, I'm not going to speak, but I'll invite all of you for a group photo. Tanya.
Thank you very much, thank you. We mustn't forget about sanitary towels for girls at school. Very important. It is my great privilege on behalf of the Simons family to thank everyone who made the symposium possible, as well as to all who are present here today and for the wonderful contributions that have been made. Particular thanks must go to our generous host and chairperson, Parliament's presiding officer, the Honourable THOKO DIDIZA, and the parliamentary staff who have worked so hard to ensure the success of this function, particularly Zubaydah Sheikh and Mil Cannon. Leon Levy, a family friend of long standing, is thanked for his inspiring keynote address, as are the other speakers for their moving contributions. Wendy, our mother, was a feminist. Kim and Ruth, your contributions were really wonderful. Thank you so much. It's appropriate that the function takes place on the 7th November, for it is a date on which teenager Rachel Esther Alexandrovich arrived in Cape Town, as you heard from Leon. And it is also the anniversary of the October Revolution, something that was always celebrated in our home. Leon Levy has told you much about our mother. We remember her as courageous and indefatigable, overcoming every obstacle that rose up before her and prevented her attempts to improve the lives of the workers. She was undaunted when facing the bosses, the bargaining councils, the wages boards, or the police forces. She sacrificed a great deal, including her family, for the fight for a democratic South Africa. All her life and all her strength was given to what she considered I quote, "the finest cause in all the world, the fight for the liberation of mankind," close quotes. Although elected a native representative in Parliament in 1954, she was prevented from taking up a seat, and she was banned. In fact, I think there was a special provision made to exclude her from entering Parliament. And in 1961 was the first person to be banned from using the Library of Parliament. Quite remarkable, and it really is vicious because she was busy researching the book that she was writing with our father. And this was a huge inconvenience to somebody who was a brilliant researcher. Although a founding member of the Federation of South African Women, she was unable to participate in the 1956 Women's March. She was largely responsible for drawing up FEDSAW's Women's Charter that became the inspiration for the Freedom Charter. Of course, her greatest contribution lies in the work that she did in the trades union movement, in the many unions she founded, the work she did for SACTU and COSATU, and her contribution to the work of the ILO. Closest to her heart was, of course, what is today FAWU, then the Food and Canning Workers Union. Food and Canning Allied Workers Union. Thank you, Leon. Of particular interest was the role of women in an unequal society and the challenges they faced as workers. She would be sad, how sad she would be about the present state of the trade unions in our country today and the huge number of unemployed and the inequality that remains in it. Of course, she could not have accomplished all that she did without the support of our father and grandfather, Jack Simons. He was both her soulmate and her helpmate. Comrade Jack was a friend and a confidant of O.R. Tambo. He taught political education to ANC members in Cape Town and Lusaka and to the MK cadres in Angola. His contribution to work of the ANC's Constitutional Committee that he chaired at the request of O.R. Tambo was immense and can be seen in the content and spirit of our Constitution today. Both our parents were generous in their support of the children of exiles, banned and imprisoned activists, and were the surrogate parents of many. Of course, their class and color in South Africa, 1852 to 1952, remains an important text for students of our country's history. Their homes in Cape Town and Lusaka were open to all. They devoted their lives to fighting for the liberation of South Africa and the creation of a better life for all, which today still seems something of a pipe dream. We are very aware of the fact that history is a harsh judge of the actions of people in power and those who play a role in society. Ray and Jack's children and grandchildren are very proud of the untarnished legacy that they have left us. We thank our National Parliament for honoring our mother in this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for thanking all of us. We want to thank you, but also in your thanks, again, you brought some memories about MaRay. We'll now go out. On your right, there are stairs there. We'll take a group picture, which we'll put on our in session, which is the Parliamentary magazine. And then we will go to have a finger lunch at V8. Which is on my left. Okay. Thank you very much. Symposium closed.